Napoleon then asked several questions about the governor. I said that Sir Hudson had desired me to say a few days ago that he had every wish to accommodate, and that he thought that Las Casas warden and Mrs. Skelton and some others had been the means of producing much ill blood and a great deal of misunderstanding. Napoleon replied, "See in Ghana. He is deceived. In the first place, it was the badness of his physiognomy. Era sua cattiva faccia. Next, his wanting to force me to receive the visit of an officer twice in the 24 hours. Then the letter to Bertrand, his wishing that I should send you away, and to give me a surgeon of his own choice. The manner in which he spoke to me about the wooden house. His letters full of softness, accompanying the train of vexations which followed, and as always leaving something doubtful, which he could afterwards interpret as best suited to his views. In fact, he wanted, by showing that he could render things disagreeable, to compel us to bend and submissively demand pardon of him, go to Plantation House, and be his very humble servants. It appears that Warden has been informed," added Napoleon, "that I applied some lines of Shakespeare to Madame Montsalon. You well know that I could not then, nor can I now, quote English verse, nor have I ever intended to convey a reflection on Madame Montsalon. On the contrary, I think that she possesses more firmness in character, decision than most of her sex." 24th, Napoleon complained of swellings in his legs, for which I recommended some simple remedies, which he put into practice. He afterwards observed that he had been reading all yesterday the secret memoirs of himself, Pinchon's work, etc. "These libels," said he, "have done me more good than harm in France, because they irritated the nation, both against the writers and the Bourbons who paid them, by representing me as a monster, and by the improbable and scandalous falsehoods they contained against me and the government under me, which were degrading to them as a nation. Even Chateaubriand has done me good by his work." Pichon, the author of The State of France under Bonaparte, had been consul in America and was disgraced by me for having embezzled 3 millions, part of which he was obliged to refund, as I was very particular with consuls and other agents and always examined their accounts myself. This Pichon, after he had published his libel, was sent by me to London as a spy. After my return from Elba, at least, he was so far sent by me that I suffered it, because though he was un coquin, a villain, he had some esprit, genius, and on account of the nature of his writings would not be suspected. You see what dependence is to be placed upon writers of libels. This man, who in 1814 had written such a libel against me, went in 1815 as a spy for the police of the very person whom he had so grossly libeled. The 25th, Napoleon in his bath, his legs much better, and very good spirits. "It appears, Mr. Doctor," said he, "from the books you lent me, that at a very early age I poisoned a girl, and I poisoned others for the mere pleasure of poisoning, that I assassinated, to say, Kleber, the Duke of Abrantes, and I know not how many others, that I went to the army of Italy, consisting of some 1,000 galley slaves, who were extremely happy to see me, as being one of the fraternity. It is surprising what things are believed on both sides, in consequence of not having had communication with each other. In France, if a house was burnt down, the vulgar attributed it to the English. Pit was the cry directly. Nothing could persuade the French canaille that the conflagration at Lyons had not been affected by the English. In like manner, you English believed everything bad of me, which belief was always encouraged by your ministers, your blank. Also, with the exception of Fox, who was sincere in his desire for peace, encouraged blank against me." Here I made some observations in disbelief of the assertion, to which Napoleon replied, "When they furnished ships to land and money to support men whose professed object was to assassinate me, was not that being privy to it? I said that they had furnished ships and money to assist in accomplishing a revolution, but without having known that assassination formed part of their plans. Doctor, replied Napoleon, you are a child. They knew it well. 50 or 60 brigands, most of them notorious for assassination, could have no other mode of effecting a revolution. They had published in London at the same time a book called Killing No Murder, which had been originally printed in Cromwell's time for the purpose of inculcating a belief that assassinating me was not only not a crime, but that it would be praiseworthy and a meritorious action. Fox indeed was of a contrary opinion. That great man wrote to Talleyrand and informed him that Cocan had come that morning to him with a proposal to assassinate me. When I was at Elba, added Napoleon, I was visited by an English nobleman, a Catholic, about 30 years old and from Northumberland, I believe. He had dined a few weeks before with the Duke de Fleury, with whom he had a conversation relative to the sum of money to be allowed me annually by France, according to the agreement that had been signed by the ministers of the Allied powers. The Duke laughed at him for supposing for a moment that it would be complied with, and said that they were not such fools. This was one of the reasons which induced me to quit Elba. I do not believe that Castlereagh thought I would have ventured to leave it, as otherwise some frigates would have been stationed about the island. If they had kept a frigate in the harbor and another outside, it would have been impossible for me to have gone to France, except alone, which I never would have attempted. If even the King of France had ordered a frigate with a picked crew to cruise off the island, it would have prevented me. I asked if he thought that it had been the intention of the Allies to have sent him to St. Helena. Why, replied the Emperor, it was much spoken of. However, Colonel Campbell denied it. They must have sent an army to take me. I could have held out for some months, but there were many violations of the Treaty of Fontainebleau by the Allies, which authorized and obliged me to take the step I did. Independent of what I have told you, it was stipulated and agreed to that all the members of my family should be allowed to follow me to Elba. But in violation of that, my wife and child were seized and detained and never permitted to join a husband and a father. They were also to have had the duchies of Parma, Plasencia, and Guastella, which were deprived of them. By the treaty, Prince Eugene was to have had a principality in Italy, which was never given. My mother and brother were to receive pensions, which were also refused to them. My own private property and the savings which I had made on the civil list were to have been preserved for me. Instead of that, they were seized in the hands of La Bouillerie, the treasurer, contrary to the treaty, and all claims made by me rejected. The private property of my family was to be held sacred. It was confiscated. The donations assigned to the army on the Mont Napoleon were to be preserved. They were suppressed, nor were the 100,000 francs which were to be given as pensions to persons pointed out by me ever paid. Moreover, assassins were sent to Elba to murder me. Never, continued Napoleon, have the terms of a treaty been more evidently violated, and indeed openly scoffed at, than those were by the Allies. And yet your ministers have the impudence to tell the nation that I was the first violator of the Treaty of Fontainebleau. I observed that the Allies had given as a reason for their conduct towards him that he had aimed at universal dominion. No, replied the Emperor, I certainly wish to render France the most powerful nation in the world, but no further. I did not aim at universal dominion. It was my intention to have made Italy an independent kingdom. There are natural bounds for France, which I did not intend to pass. It was my object to prevent England from being able to go to war with France without assistance from some of the great continental powers, without which, indeed, she ought never to venture. I had some conversation about Ferdinand of Spain. When Ferdinand was at Valence, said Napoleon, he always expressed great hatred of the English and declared that the first thing he would do on his return to Spain would be to reestablish the Inquisition. You English will find one day that by restoring him, you've done yourselves a great national injury. While at Valence, he said that he would prefer remaining in France turning to Spain and wrote several times to me begging of me to adopt and give him a French woman in marriage. I observe now, added he, that as your ministers and the Bourbonists cannot any longer deny that I have done some good to France, they endeavor to turn it by saying that whatever good I effected was done through the persuasions of Josephine. For example, they say that it was Josephine who induced me to recall the emigrants. Now, the fact is that Josephine was the most amiable and the best of women, but she never interfered with politics. Their object is to persuade the world that I am incapable of a good action, but your English travelers will produce a great change in the opinion of their nation. Sir Pulteney and Lady Malcolm, Captain Stanfield and Fasting of the Navy, came up and had an interview with Napoleon. When they came out, Captain Blank expressed his astonishment at finding Napoleon so different a person to what was reported. Instead of being a rough, impatient, and imperious character, said he, I found him to be mild, gentle in his manner, and one of the pleasantest men I ever saw. I shall never forget him, nor how different he is from the idea I had been led to form of him. Sir Pulteney Malcolm expressed his ardent wish to me that matters might be accommodated between Napoleon and the governor, adding that two opportunities of effecting it would soon present themselves, viz., the arrival of Lord Amherst and of Admiral Plampin, that he much wished that both should be introduced by Sir Hudson Lowe, and indeed thought that Lord Amherst could not be introduced by any other person. Napoleon, accompanied by Countess Bertrand and Monttalon and their husbands, walked down into the wood. On their return, chairs were brought out and placed in front of the billiard room, where they remained for some time after sunset. The 26th. Napoleon conversed a good deal about the Battle of Waterloo. The plan of the battle, said he, will not, in the eyes of the historian, reflect any credit on Lord Wellington as a general. In the first place, he ought not to have given battle with the armies divided. They ought to have been united and encamped before the 15th. In the next, the choice of ground was bad, because if he had been beaten, he could not have retreated, as there was only one road leading to the forest in his rear. He also committed a fault which might have proved the destruction of all his army without its ever having commenced the campaign or being drawn out in battle. He allowed himself to be surprised. On the 15th, I was at Charleroi and had beaten the Prussians without his knowing anything about it. I had gained 48 hours of maneuvers upon him, which was a great object. And if some of my generals had shown that vigor and genius which they had displayed in other times, I should have taken his army and cantonments without ever fighting a battle. But they were discouraged and fancied that they saw an army of 100,000 men everywhere opposed to them. I had not time enough myself to attend to the minutiae of the army. I reckoned upon surprising and cutting them up in detail. I knew of Bulow's arrival at 11 o'clock, but I did not regard it. I had still 80 chances out of 100 in my favor, notwithstanding the great superiority of force against me. I was convinced that I should obtain the victory. I had about 70,000 men, of whom 15,000 were cavalry. I had also 250 pieces of cannon, but my troops were so good that I esteemed them sufficient to beat 120,000. Now Lord Wellington had under his command about 90,000 and 250 pieces of cannon, and Bulow had 30,000, making 120,000. Of all those troops, however, I only reckon the English as being able to cope with my own. The others I thought little of. I believe that of English there were from 35 to 40,000. These I esteem to be as brave and as good as my own troops. The English army was well known latterly on the continent, and besides, your nation possesses courage and energy. As to the Prussians, Belgians, and others, half of the number of my troops were sufficient to beat them. I only left 34,000 men to take care of the Prussians. The chief cause of the loss of that battle were, first of all, Grouchy's great tardiness and neglect in executing his orders. Next, the grenadiers of Cheval, the mounted grenadiers, and the cavalry under Chiricahua. which I had in reserve, and which were never to leave me engaged without orders and without my knowledge, so that after the last charge, when the troops were beaten and the English cavalry advanced, I had not a single corps of cavalry in reserve to resist them, instead of one which I esteemed to be equal to double their own number. In consequence of this, the English attack succeeded, and all was lost. There was no means of rallying. The youngest general would not have committed the fault of leaving an army entirely without reserve, which, however, occurred here. Whether in consequence of treason or not, I cannot say. These were the two principal causes of the loss of the Battle of Waterloo.